Lords, I rise to move Amendment 10, and I'm rather aware from the Noble Lady Minister's response to the last group that this may have been differently grouped in her list to my list, but I'm just going to proceed anyway, and then if she says I refer you to my previous answer at the end, I will understand. Amendment 10 refers to reducing to sustainable levels the UK's use of natural resources and emissions of non-greenhouse gas pollutants, and to secure the interests of future generations. To address the second part of that first, I'm sure many Noble Lords will recognise the language there, which is very much inspired by the Noble Lord Bird's Private Members Bill about the protecting the well-being of future generations, and indeed by the the progress done in Wales with their Future Generations Act. It's perhaps another way of getting at towards first do no harm, as we discussed in the previous group of amendments. But more than that, it's making a larger claim, which is we know that the natural world, air pollution, water pollution, etc. in the UK is at a parlous state. It's saying if we're looking after the well-being of future generations, the bank should be investing to improve the state of things, just not to make sure that they don't get any worse. And the first part of this amendment addresses something that I really think Your Lordship's House, the government, we really need to get more focused on, which is the issue of planetary limits. Now, we started in the last group to talk about how we need to add attention to biodiversity and the state of nature and nature-based solutions, tying together those two planetary limits with which the world is crossing over. But actually, we are now at a situation where academics tell us we have broken 5 of the 9 planetary boundaries. 3 of those are climate, biodiversity and land system change, which I think we've already covered to some degree. But we also come to the other 2 broken planetary limits, which are biogeochemical flows and what's generally known as pollution from novel entities, which we might, in general terminology, talk about chemicals. There's about 350,000 of these being used in the world, which includes pesticides, antibiotics, plastics, industrial chemicals in mining and pharmaceuticals. And so the reason why this adds an objective to the bank is to see that it starts to address these issues of reducing the harm done by these is we are globally and in the UK very much exceeding our actual share of the limits of these things. And so this amendment is supposed to address both the biogeochemical flows and the novel chemicals. Just coming briefly to the biogeochemical flows, the rates of nitrate and phosphate use in the UK are both well above the global average, and according to our Global Footprint report, we must reduce both nitrogen and phosphorus use by at least 80%. Yes, I did say 80. Now, I would say that if we're going to have a bank that's investing in the kind of economy we have to live for the future within the planetary limits, the bank needs to be thinking about not just climate and not just nature, but also the damage being done. And this is here where we're getting to our farming systems and why my previous amendment referred to infrastructure that deals with food production, because that's what this is overwhelmingly related to when we come to phosphorus and nitrogen, although also sewage plants have their place. That we have to look at this as a whole and see that the bank is investing essentially, for shorthand, in a sustainable economy. Now, the Noble Lord Teverson in the previous group had an amendment talking about the circular economy, and that is a necessary and essential step forward, but it's not a sufficient step, because not only do we have to make sure we're not treating the planet as a dumping ground, pulling mining materials out of the earth and just dumping them, we have to stop mining those materials out of the earth, or at least vastly reduce the amount of mining that we're taking out of the earth. And so that's what that first amendment really seeks to achieve. And anyone who wants to know where all of my research, particularly around novel entities, comes from, it's researchers from the Stockholm Resilience Centre published in the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology earlier this year. So I think also, just to address one other point, and this is going back very much, as I think we will have in this group several times, to our Environment Bill debates. This talks about reducing resource use. And I'll refer Noble Lords back to a report that the WWF put out when we were debating the Environment Bill, talking about the UK's overseas land footprint. And that showed that between 2016 and 18, an average annual area of 21.3 million hectares was required to supply the UK's demand for just 7 commodities. So if we're thinking about what the bank is investing in, we cannot be putting further pressure on other parts of the world through the things that the bank's investing in. And so this is an attempt to bring in that very much systems thinking approach. I come now to the other amendments I have in this group, which you may be pleased to hear are both simpler and shorter. The first is Amendment 18. And I think it's really quite surprising that when we look at the way this bill is written, when talking about infrastructure, it says roads and other forms of transport, which does seem a rather odd way round for a bill that's supposed to be addressing the climate emergency. What this does is takes out the word roads, and at least implicitly, I do not believe that the UK Infrastructure Bank should be investing in any new roads. We know that new roads generate more traffic. For the foreseeable future, for the really crucial point, if we're going to keep the world below 1.5 degrees, those roads, that traffic is going to be generating significant amounts of greenhouse gases, not to mention all of the other impacts in terms of air pollution, noise pollution, which if this investment is going into disadvantaged areas, the last thing those disadvantaged areas need is more air, noise pollution. And air pollution is also, electric vehicles also produce air pollution because a large amount of the pollution they produce is from tyres and brakes, the particulate matter pollution. So building new roads in disadvantaged areas really makes no environmental or social economic well-being sense. So what I've simply done is taken the word roads out and said mass transport, because that's obviously what the bank should be investing in, both for environmental and social reasons. And the final point is my Amendment 25, and this is something that a number of Noble Lords raised in second reading debate. The activities of the bank covers a large number of utilities, obviously electricity, water, etc. What's not clear is it talks about services, but I don't think it's at all clear whether services includes demand reduction, includes efficiency. The cleanest, greenest energy we can possibly have is the energy we don't need to use. And the UK Infrastructure Bank surely has to be investing in reducing the demand for electricity, for heating, for indeed water use, because in these islands water stress is becoming an increasing issue in the reality of climate change and the adaptation issues we were discussing earlier. So, I mean, it may be the Noble Lady Minister will say, yes, the bill already covers these demand reduction things, these issues. But I do rather feel that this is something more we need explicitly on the face of the bill to say the bank should be investing in demand reduction of these things that it's also investing in the generation of.